Coming up on this episode, a new and rather sad and disappointing update on the future of Klay Thompson, the latest on Kevon Looney, plus my thoughts on the Josh Giddey, Alex Caruso trade and potential ramifications for Golden State, along with a couple of centers reportedly on the trademark that the Warriors should be heavily interested in. Yes, welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. Sunday night here for me in Australia. Hope you're all having a good weekend or had a good weekend wherever you may be. I just wanted to jump on in this episode and talk mainly about Klay Thompson to begin with, but then a couple other Warrior players and some happenings around the league as well. The latest on Klay, well, I mean, it seems to be an update every single day, which is unsurprising given we are now just over a week out until free agency where Klay can officially begin negotiations with other teams. Of course, up until that point, he can continue negotiations with the Warriors, but it seems like that is not the case, unfortunately. The Athletic's Anthony Slater reporting on Saturday US time that talks have essentially frozen between Thompson's management and the Warriors, which is, I mean, this is certainly the most pessimistic outlook I think we've had on the whole Klay topic, even though, over the course of the last few months, it's kind of been dwindling, the chances of him re-signing with the Warriors. I mean, we have been getting more pessimistic the longer time goes on, obviously, and unfortunately, this is probably the most dire the situation has been in, according to Slater anyway, who states that there's no offer on the table for Klay at the moment, which is absolutely extraordinary. Absolutely, I cannot fathom. I don't know if that's. I find that hard to. I'm not saying he's wrong. Like, he is incredibly well connected. He's the number one Warriors insider, but I find it incredibly difficult to believe that there's no offer at all on the table. And I don't know if that's something coming from Klay's side where it's not that there's no offer on the table, but that there's no legitimate offer that they're going to accept necessarily. I just find it difficult. Like, why would the Warriors not have an offer on the table? I find that hard to believe. And this is where things are getting really murky, and this is where things are getting really difficult. And this is where I wrote about today for BlueManHoop.com. The Warriors need to go into preserving legacy mode on this one. And I'll talk about that in a second. But I think, obviously, you've got the fact that there's no offer on the table. But I think the most concerning element for me here and for Warrior fans here should be this quote from Slater, who said, even if the Warriors eventually approach Klay Thompson with a competitive offer, matching or exceeding the money and years, it has become increasingly conceivable, according to league sources, that Thompson will decide to leave regardless, searching for a fresh start in a different environment, detached from some of the built-up friction of the previous couple of seasons. That's the most concerning element to me, because I've always been of the presumption, and this is just, again, me presuming more than anything else, that Klay wants to remain with the Warriors, that if the Warriors can get in the same ballpark of whatever rival teams are going to offer, then he will ultimately re-sign with the Warriors. That's what I have thought. And I just thought, okay, this is a financial thing. This is, if the Warriors can get, as I said, anywhere in the realm of what rival teams are going to offer, then Klay will remain with the Warriors. And so when I heard Yahoo Sports' Jake Fisher report on Friday that the Magic are only going to offer prospective free agents 2-year deals, then I thought, well, Klay wants 3. If the Magic aren't willing to offer 3, then that should swing things back in the Warriors' favor quite a bit, because, again, they're not going to necessarily up the price on Klay, and therefore that's something the Warriors won't have to match. Klay will come back to the Warriors, see what they'll offer, blah, blah, blah. I thought, it's back in the Warriors' favor a little bit here. But to hear that from Slater, to hear that regardless of the financial offer, regardless of the years and the money, that Klay could still leave based really on happiness. And again, that last little bit says detached from some of the built-up friction of the previous couple of seasons. That's the most disappointing element to me of all this. Because again, I think the franchise now needs to go into legacy preservation mode, which essentially to me is you do not have, I'm not saying as the Warriors you have to retain and re-sign Klay at all costs. I'm not saying that. But you have to be very careful with how you go about the next week or so, or whatever, however long it may be, because we're not talking just about Klay Thompson's playing future next season and beyond. We are talking about his historical standing at the Golden State Warriors and how we as fans are going to view him in 10, 20, 30, 40 years' time. And I've long been concerned, like I'm looking at the Chicago Bulls right now. You look at the relationship between Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, or lack thereof. I do not want that for the Warriors. I do not want this dynasty team, 4 championships within a decade, to look back in 20, 30 years and not be able to celebrate those things together. There is going to be a time, whenever it may be, there's going to be countless times in the future where Klay Thompson and Steph Curry and Draymond Green and everything the Warriors have accomplished over the last 10 to 12 years, it is going to be celebrated endlessly. It already has, but it will be again in the future. And when that moment comes, Klay Thompson needs to be able to walk through an open door at the Warriors, feel comfortable, have celebrated friendships and relationships with people in the organization, and for him and the franchise to be able to share the love and enjoy the success that they accomplished together. And you do not want a situation here. The last thing the Warriors can do in this situation is let Klay Thompson walk out the door despising anyone in the organization or despising the franchise in any way. And that is the big thing for me right now, is it's not just about re-signing Klay Thompson, whether you do that or you don't. It's about how you go about it and not letting one of your best ever players, a franchise legend, as I said, walk out the door with the friction that we are talking, that Slater has literally mentioned in that article. Like, that cannot happen. We cannot get to a situation where the relationships between Klay and other key members of the organization diminish. That needs to be retained somewhat, regardless of what he does and where he goes in free agency. And I'm not saying this is totally on the Warriors. Like, Klay needs to come to, and this is what I've said all along, like, Klay needs to come to the party here as well a bit. He can't just, go away and sook and say, I'm done and dusted. That's not totally fair. But at the same time, like, the Warriors also have to come to the party and treat Klay in a way, like we're talking about the respect factor here, right? And the respect factor is been a growing element in all of this over the last few weeks, and Klay trying to feel respected. And it's hard to necessarily gauge this when we don't know what Klay necessarily wants in terms of respect, and whether his bar of respect is probably too high than what we might expect, kind of thing. But the respect thing also comes down to the financial element, and we're going to see what the Warriors are going to be willing to offer Klay in free agency. But it appears at this point, as Slater has said, that it's growing more and more likely. It looks as likely as it ever has that Klay will depart the Warriors. And that's going to be incredibly upsetting for me, being, Klay being my favorite ever player. But I'm going to be more upset if he leaves on bad terms and has he's not going to necessarily have bad things to say about the franchise publicly, but if he doesn't have good things to say, or he tries to sort of manipulate comments kind of thing in a way where you can tell that he's pissed off by what he's saying in the media, then as we've seen at times in the past, I think that's what's going to make me upset. That's what, if he leaves on bad terms, not him necessarily leaving full stop. So I'm concerned. I'm literally concerned about this, because as fans, we deserve the right to be able to celebrate these guys for the rest of eternity, essentially, and to be able to do so in a manner where those guys come together. But it's not just about, it's not about the fans. Like, that's the last thing. But it is about Klay and the franchise. Like, Klay should be able to celebrate what he's done already for the franchise over his 13-year career. He should be able to celebrate that 10, 20, 30 years down the line without feeling uncomfortable in any way, shape, or form. And the franchise deserves to celebrate as well, because this is the best era of Golden State Warriors basketball we've ever seen, right? And this will live in the memory. This will live in history forever. And so this is why it's so important that these next week, 2 weeks, are handled appropriately and not in a manner that could jeopardize that and how we see Klay and his standing at the franchise in 10, 20, 30 years' time. Because again, I go back and you look at the relationship between Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, and that's incredibly disappointing. I think it's incredibly sad, and that's not what we want. Like, can you imagine, 20 years time, Klay doesn't talk to Steph anymore, or doesn't talk to Draymond anymore, and doesn't have a relationship with those guys anymore? Like, we can't fathom that right now. But this is the kind of thing where this next week or two is so important in preserving these things. And as I call it, a legacy preservation mode that the Warriors need to go into. The only other thing on Slater's report really mainly was to do with Kevon Looney, which is a more positive outcome by the sounds of it, where Slater reported that the Warriors will probably let June 24 pass without cutting Loon, which means his contract will become guaranteed. Of course, only $3 million at the moment is guaranteed to that $8 million deal for next season. Sounds like the Warriors will guarantee that contract. That doesn't mean that Loon is going to be on the opening night roster next season. He will become, or could become a trade candidate, as Slater wrote in his article. But we'll just wait and see on that one. The first step was obviously to guarantee that contract. I've spoke about it relentlessly in recent episodes. For those of you that have listened to that, you know my perspective on this. I think that this is the right move to guarantee the contract. I don't think there was too much downside to it, keeping Loon and guaranteeing that contract. And I think I would have been disappointed at the lack of loyalty and, again, the respect factor of, if they'd cut Loon for the sake of, $5 million. Yes, millions of dollars more perhaps in luxury tax. Yep, we get that. But cutting a 3-time champion, a 9-year player at the franchise who has such a say and is such a key figure in the locker room, so well respected, a veteran leader in there, doing that for the sake of a few $1 million wouldn't have sat right with me. Not only for those factors, but also the fact that Loon has played or overplayed on his value in recent seasons. Like, you go back, not this season just gone, 2022, 23, his career best year, again, making less than $8 million. That year, he played like a $14, $15 million player, particularly come playoff time where we know he dominated Domantas Sabonis. So there's got to be some two-way loyalty here and respect, and I think it's the right decision that Loon will stay on, at least in terms of guaranteeing his salary, and we'll see what happens come trade time. But I'm as disappointed and as saddened as I was with the Klay update. I was happy and pleased with the Loon update. I just wanted to speak about the big trade that we saw a few days ago now involving the Chicago Bulls and the Oklahoma City Thunder. A disappointing one for the Warriors, you'd have to say, from a Golden State perspective. So Alex Caruso to the OKC Thunder for Josh Giddey. Again, people that have listened to my episodes over the last few months talking about some of the playoff action and whatnot would know my thoughts on Josh Giddey. I thought he should have been traded from the Thunder elsewhere last offseason. I think you could tell a fair way out here that his fit at the Thunder was not going to be a good one and that he wasn't going to work long term. And I am completely stunned that they were able to get to this point and still be able to trade him directly for a player of Alex Caruso's caliber. I am, like many people, I am shocked that the Chicago Bulls were not able to get something more in the way of draft capital from the Oklahoma City Thunder. I do not know how that happened. And again, from a Warriors standpoint, you're talking about the Thunder as one of the lead contenders in the Western Conference, the team that finished on top of the West in the regular season, who just got infinitely better, in my opinion. Not that Alex Caruso is an infinitely better player than Josh Giddey. Like, I'll talk about Josh in a second. But the fit, specifically, is so much better. Is unbelievably better. And so the Thunder just became such a better team as a result of this. And then from a Warriors standpoint, not only do the Thunder get so much better as a result of this trade, which is a direct rival of yours in the Western Conference, but they not steal because the Warriors never had him in their hands, but I'll use that word, steal Caruso, who would have been probably one of your top-tier trade targets away from you. And that's the thing. Warriors had significant interest in Caruso going back to the midseason deadline. We know that. They would have likely made another move for Caruso this offseason if the Thunder hadn't, or if they'd had more time, whatever it may be. And I don't know. We don't know the length that the Warriors might have gone in the last few days before that Caruso-Giddey trade. The fact is, the last episode I proposed a GP2 Guy Santos 2027 first-round pick trade to the Bulls for Alex Caruso, and then 6 hours later after the episode was published, this trade goes down. Of course, it's the timing of it. But I am slightly surprised, and clearly Chicago are a lot higher on Josh Giddey, I think, than most people would probably evaluate. Because I look at this and I just think, what's Josh Giddey's value? Is it somewhere between, like if it was just in draft pick terms, is it somewhere between pick 10 and pick 20? Maybe. Like that's probably somewhere between there, maybe. It depends what draft it is. Obviously, this draft would be higher than future drafts. It's hard to evaluate from that standpoint. But I just find it hard to believe that the Warriors couldn't have come up with a better offer to Chicago than Josh Giddey straight up. Again, you offer an unprotected first-round pick in 3 years' time when Steph Curry's 39. I think I'd almost prefer that over Josh Giddey. Now, there's certainly the element of perhaps Chicago want to be competitive still, and that therefore they far greater covet a player they can have right now to utilize rather than a draft pick in 3-4 years' time, whatever it may be. That's certainly a part of it, but I just find it hard to think that the Warriors couldn't have stumped up a better offer that us as fans could also still point to and say, yeah, we can understand why you did that. That's a good trade. We're happy to get Alex Caruso, where it's not complete overs kind of thing. So this is a disappointing one for the Warriors. And from a Chicago perspective, look, I'm a Josh fan. He's Australian. He's our best player. We're going to be cheering him on in the Olympics next month. I think Bulls fans watching the Olympics are probably going to be pretty excited by what Josh produces, because he's going to be able to have the ball in his hands all the time, be able to run the Boomer offense. He's going to put up numbers. He's going to, have 20 plus points. He's going to have, 7 plus rebounds, 8 plus assists. Like, he's going to put up numbers and he's going to look quite good. And hopefully, he can lead us to a medal. But the issue here is that the Australian Boomers are not quite, as much as I'd like to think they were, not quite the caliber of NBA teams or the high-end NBA teams or teams that want to be playoff relevant in the NBA. And so for me, the Boomers can get away with letting Josh Giddey run the offense and him being the fulcrum of your team and the fulcrum of your offense, right? He can run things, and you can design an offense around him at the Olympic level, at the international level if you're the Boomers. However, we're talking about the Chicago Bulls here, and I think at best, and I'm saying at best, Josh is the third best player on a good playoff team. At best, and more likely the fourth to sixth. Right, you're talking about a Thunder team who, obviously top tier of the Western Conference, wanted to bring Josh off the bench next season. Okay, be their 6th, 7th man. Okay, so you're more than likely thinking 4th to 7th. At best, 3rd, in my opinion. Which NBA team designs their offense around their 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th best player? Who does that? There's no team that does. There is no team that designs their offense around their 4th, 5th best player. And so how does Chicago go about doing that now? And if you're going to do that, if you're going to design an offense around Josh Giddey, which you essentially need to do given his, not just an offense, but a team because of his defensive liabilities and obviously his shooting liabilities. And so how do you design a team around that is also trying to make the playoffs? I find that very, you are severely limited, I think, in what you can do. And so you look at what Chicago are going to do now. Obviously, Caruso's gone. What happens with Levine? Strong reports, obviously, that they're trying to move him. I've read a bit about it in terms of a Warrior fit with Levine. Depending on the price, I wouldn't hate it. I just don't think the franchise is going to want to give or going to want to trade for a guy who's still got 3 years left and nearly $150 million on his contract. I find that hard to believe when he's Zach LaVine. He's a 2-time All-Star, yes, but he's not an All-NBA player by any means. So I find that hard to believe. As much as I can see for any team, I can see the upside of, hey, we can just get this guy essentially for salary matching purposes. We do not have to give up much in the way of assets. The Warriors can go and get Zach LaVine while keeping Jonathan Kuminga, Brandon Podziemski, Trace Jackson-Davis, and all their future picks probably. They could probably go and do that. However, again, are you going to want to pay that guy 3 years, $150 million? Can you see the upside of potentially, first of all, you need to get him healthy. He played 25 games this season. Can you get him healthy and available? And then can you get him back to being the all-star caliber player he was? And not just that, not just a guy that puts up numbers, but a winning NBA player. And I think what the Warriors did with Wiggins and his turnaround from kind of empty stats guy to genuine playoff performer, playoff impact, as we saw in 2022, that turnaround might give you some optimism that the Warriors could do more with LaVine, who has got less defensive capacity, but has got more offensive talent than Wiggins, and the Warriors probably need that a little bit, obviously looking for a secondary offensive star to pair with Steph. So I can see the intrigue in Zach LaVine. I just don't think that the Warriors are necessarily going to do it with the contract, which is the whole reason why LaVine is going to be available for a pretty cheap price based on the talent that he has offensively. And then the other one is DeRozan, who's a free agent. Does this increase the chances of him leaving in free agency? He'd have to. Or the Bulls need to try and orchestrate a sign and trade and get something in return, because I fail to understand how Josh Giddey and DeMar DeRozan will functionally work on an NBA floor together. I'm sorry, it won't happen. I cannot see how that team would be any good. I don't. I'm sorry. Yeah. It's just much as, like the spacing issues are going to be terrible. Josh needs the ball in his hands. I do like the fit between him and Kobe White. I think Kobe White's good enough to play off ball as an off-ball shooter enough where those two guys can combine. I don't like the defensive elements are going to be a big issue, but at least offensively they'll fit. As the DeRozan Giddey, that's not going to work in any way, shape, or form. I promise you that. And as a result, like the Bulls should be absolutely looking to get off DeMar DeRozan this offseason, but you don't want to lose him for nothing at the same time. So what do you like? Can you orchestrate a sign and trade? I don't know. That's probably what they should be pushing towards. And then the other player is Lonzo Ball, who was interesting in the report. I think it was from KC Johnson in Chicago, said that he'll either be traded or a potential buyout. Now, no one should be trading for Lonzo Ball, least of all the Warriors. The Warriors should not be touching Lonzo Ball's contract with a 10-foot pole. However, if he was bought out and this is the big and the Warriors were able to get themselves below, it's not just the second tax apron, but the first tax apron I think you need to get under to be eligible to get a buyout player who didn't previously make more than the taxpayer mid-level exception on their previous contract, which Lonzo fits in that mold. So they need to get not only under the second apron, but the first apron. If they did that and Lonzo was bought out, Lonzo Ball on a minimum contract would be well worth the risk. Well worth the risk. Because when healthy, I don't want to laugh when I say that, but like we are talking, like I'm not even sure why I laugh, because it's actually incredibly sad what's happened with Lonzo and the fact that he has not played a game since January 2022. That's 4 or 5 months before the Warriors won their last championship, which is starting to feel like a fair while ago. And so it's an incredibly sad situation, like it genuinely is. But when healthy, Lonzo would be a great fit at the Warriors. And a great fit. Because he is incredibly versatile, really, on both ends of the floor. Like, he can play off ball, shoot. Was shooting 40% from three before his injury. Obviously, an incredibly good ball handling, decision maker, playmaker. Got size, can defend at a high level. I think not only would he be great as a backup point guard, but you could also foreseeably certainly see him playing next to Steph in the same backcourt because of the size, because of the defensive impact he can have, because of the ability to play off the ball as a catch and shoot threat. Like, this guy, I think we have to try and remember how good he was prior to injury. In those 35 games he played for Chicago before the injury, the Bulls were 22-13. They were a legitimately good playoff team. And then since that point, they have been, frankly, nowhere near that level again. And so he was a genuine good NBA player who was having a big impact on winning. And so for any team, if he becomes a buyout and you can get him for the minimum, taxpayer mid-level exception, whatever it may be, like that's a risk worth taking, even though he hasn't played basketball in 30 months, essentially. So again, the Warriors would have to jump through some hoops to even be eligible to sign him, but maybe one just to monitor over the next could be a couple of months really before, I'm sure Chicago will try and get through all they need to get through in the offseason in terms of trades, free agency and stuff before they even really make a decision on Lonzo, because I don't think any team is going to be trading for that contract. That is for sure. A couple of centers that I wanted to speak about. Obviously not necessarily a top priority for the Warriors, but in terms of their roster needs, like there is a huge issue with their front court, obviously, that I've spoken about at length in terms of having Jonathan Kuminga and Draymond Green both as mainly power forwards and then Trace Jackson-Davis. So how do the Warriors give Kuminga a starting role, an opportunity to continue to thrive while still having a defense that is going to be above average, while still allowing Draymond to play next to a genuine center where he does his best defensive work rather than relying on him as a 6'5", 6'6", player needing to play big minutes at center? How do the Warriors go about doing that, right? And I think the need for a stretch big is very high this offseason, very high. And the Warriors have tried to do it on the cheap in recent seasons. They obviously got away with it with Otto Porter Jr., who was massive for them in the 2021-22 championship season. He was fantastic. Not a center by any means, but that power forward that allowed, 6'10", good rebounder, strong defender, allowed Draymond to play more at the 5. And then they tried to get away with it again by going to JaMychal Green. Didn't work at all. Tried to get away with it again with Dario Saric. Worked for a little bit early in the season. And then by the end of it, he was out of the rotation. I think those two failures would suggest that the Warriors need to dig a bit deeper, need to go to a bit of a higher level to try and attract a shooting big man, rather than necessarily try and rely on free agency and getting one on a minimum contract, because at the end of the day, they're players and minimum contracts for a reason. You're probably not going to get too much value out of them necessarily, and a guy like Otto Porter Jr. is probably the exception rather than the rule. So a couple of options here that were floated by Yahoo Sports' Jake Fisher on Friday US time, which perked my interest from a Warrior perspective. There's no doubt about that. The first one, who I think would be an amazing fit in Golden State, and there's been murmurs of his availability in recent weeks, and I've kind of questioned why that is the case, and I've questioned if they are real in any way, shape, or form. But this report certainly suggested that they are real, and that is Brook Lopez, who Fisher says the Bucks are monitoring his trade value over the offseason, obviously, and potentially looking to change things up a little bit, particularly defensively, become a bit more versatile on that end, blah, blah, blah. No one cares about it from a Milwaukee standpoint. The fact is, if Brook Lopez is available, this is someone that the Warriors should certainly be targeting. Yes, 36 years old. Yes, entering year 17 next season, I think. But a guy that's still a productive two-way force in the NBA. Averaged 12.5 points this season, nearly 36.6% three-point shooting this season. I'll get my words out. Over 2 blocks a game. Again, going back to last season, 2022-23, what was he, second in Defensive Player of the Year voting, all NBA defensive first team. Still a very good player in this league. And I'm putting my hat down on this one. If the Warriors do not trade for a star, like a genuine all-star player this season, a guy that we look at as, okay, he could make the all-star team next season. If they don't trade for a guy like that, then I think Brook Lopez would be the most impactful piece they could possibly get outside that caliber of player. And the reason is solely because of how he would fit and the opportunities that it would provide for the Warriors in terms of their lineups. Because all of a sudden, Steve Kerr spoke about playing Jonathan Kuminga at the 3 and whether he can be developed into being able to do that, to that being a viable option next season. Can he improve his shooting? Can he improve his ball handling, decision making to be a viable 3 rather than primarily a 4, which he is at the moment? Well, the necessities of him, improving his shooting and all that other stuff lessens if you can get a shooting big man in Brook Lopez and a shooting big man that is good, that is going to shoot above 36, 37% from three-point range, and he's a legitimate defensive force in the paint. Allows Kuminga to play more at the 3, Draymond at the 4, Lopez at the 5. I think that would be fantastic. That would be fantastic. You can use Kuminga then in a way and hope he develops in a way, and I'm not saying he's Giannis. No one's saying he's Giannis. But you can try and develop him in a way that is very similar to that, where you spread the floor. And there is going to be times next season where the Warriors need, especially if they don't get that second offensive star, to lessen the burden on Steph. They need to give the ball, and we saw this at times this season, they need to give the ball more to Jonathan Kuminga. Let him go ISO every now and again. And that's going to be so much easier if the paint isn't clogged with a Kevon Looney or a Trace Jackson Davis, and you can have a guy spacing out on the perimeter like Brook Lopez, while, again, that also fortifies your defense on the other end where you've still got a genuine shot blocker playing next to Draymond. I just think it would be the perfect fit from a Golden State standpoint. And I don't know what it would take necessarily, but you've got to inquire about it if you're the Warriors. You've got to see what it's going to take. My colleague at Blue Man Hoop /Fansided, Josh Cornelison, did a trade proposal a couple of weeks ago that saw Loon, Gary Payton II, and Moses Moody go to the Bucks for Brook Lopez. If that was at all available, if Mike rang up, offered that, and the Bucks said yes, that is a home run trade. It just is. You make that trade 100 times out of 100. I love Loon, love GP2, love Moses. You're gone if it means bringing back Brook Lopez. You absolutely do that trade. Okay, do I think the Bucks would do that? No. I think you'd have to add draft capital to it. I'm not sure if even they'd want to do. I'm not sure if they'd want Looney. I'm not sure if they'd want. GP2 could probably be handy from their. They obviously had major perimeter defensive issues this season. Moody could be handy for them. There's some upside for the Bucks there, but they're probably going to want a draft pick. They might try and exchange different players. I don't know, but if you're the Warriors, you've got to inquire about it because it would be the perfect fit. And given that fit, I think it would be the most impactful trade the Warriors could make outside of genuinely trading for a second star. So Brook Lopez, certainly one to monitor here over the coming weeks. A couple others. As shocked as I was about the Lopez news, this news might have shocked me more, and that is Fisher also reporting that rivals believe Walker Kessler from the Jazz may be available on the trade market. I don't know why. I'm sorry. I know his numbers, like you look at his numbers this season, they actually went down a bit from his rookie year, but you're talking about a guy who just over 12 months ago was third in Rookie of the Year voting, was all NBA rookie first team, has averaged 2.3 blocks and then 2.4 blocks in his 2 seasons to date. Strong rebounder. After his rookie year, was part of the US World Cup team, whatever it was. Seriously good young player. And under team contract for another 2 seasons at less than $8 million total. 7'1" shot blocker. Yes, doesn't stretch the floor by any means, which is why I think Lopez would still be the best option for the Warriors. But again, if Walker Kessler is legitimately available, if you are the Warriors, you are doing yourself a disservice if you are not seeing what that takes. I know having both TJD and Kessler on the same roster, 2 young centers who are similar-ish, like neither of them stretch the floor by any means. That might be a bit awkward, I get it, but I think that risk is totally mitigated by the fact that you're going to have both those guys under contract for TJD another 3 years at like less than $7 million and Kessler another 2 years at less than $8 million. You are spending nothing on those guys from a salary perspective. So therefore, the risk is totally mitigated, in my opinion. And the upside is you've got 2 young guys there who, yes, in time, they might both prove they're starting caliber players, and therefore you might not be able to retain both of them long term. But in the next couple of seasons, you could have essentially your center rotation completely sorted, where you've got 48 minutes of strong center minutes between those 2 guys. That is the upside. And you are spending minimum chips on it from a salary perspective. Again, you'd be doing your disservice if you're the Warriors, if you're not inquiring about what Walker Kessler would take. So that's something you got to look at. Again, I think Lopez would be the ideal fit just because of the offense that he gives you in terms of stretching the floor. But again, the Warriors, I think, need a genuine 7-footer here. At least one that's functional, one that's reasonable, one that you can throw out there for 15 minutes and see what can happen. And I know this like Loon news, obviously with them guaranteeing his contract or about to, that obviously probably lessens the need somewhat. But I still think like if you traded for Walker Kessler and you had Kessler and TJD, maybe Loon can still be on the roster as like a third big. And, he's at worst, he's there for veteran leadership to provide education to those two young guys. Like it wouldn't be horrific if he's still on the roster. But I'm not looking at this and thinking, okay, we just guaranteed Loon's contract. We've got Loon as backup center, therefore we're not going to trade for Walker Kessler. No. You still bring in Walker Kessler, and if that means moving Loon, then so be it. If that means having him as a third center where you're paying him $8 million to essentially be a teacher, be a coach, pretty much, and provide leadership, then so be it. Again, you can get away with that when you're paying your first two centers less than $5 million combined next season. You can do that. Walker Kessler, got to be on the radar. So is Brook Lopez. Another one I quickly want to mention, not as serious interest I wouldn't have thought, but Isaiah Stewart, again, $15 million a year, stretch the floor for you. I can see the upside in that. The issue is the guy, again, making $15 million, so you've got to get the salary to that point, which could prove difficult. Not difficult, but you'd be giving up legitimate assets in that perspective. And not obviously being at a winning, being at the opposite of a winning culture, a complete losing culture in Detroit. Never has shown an ability to be a winning player. Not a great defensive player by any means. So I'm not sure, would that actually, him and Draymond work at the 4-5? Don't know. If you're going to have, him at the 5 and Kuminga at the 3 or whatever else, is there too much youth there if the Warriors want to be really competitive? I don't know. But that's probably another name to monitor just because of the 3-point shooting that he would give you as an option there offensively. So other than that, though, Lopez certainly number one, and I'd be very much inquiring on Kessler if Lopez isn't available just to see what the price is. Other than that, in fact, I just wanted to mention a couple of comments that we had on YouTube from the last episode. Hybrid Nick 1291 said, I would definitely do the third trade for Larry Markkinen. It makes a lot of sense. That was the trade I proposed that saw GP2, JK, Pods, and 2 future first-round picks head to the Jazz for Larry Markkinen. Can we get Walker Kessler in that deal now as well? I don't know. Certainly a trade that I think, a proposal, because we saw the other one from Bleacher Report as well, which had Moody there instead of GP2. Certainly a trade that I think has divided Warrior fans on social media on whether or not you'd make that deal, which I think would suggest that it's actually pretty fair value. If you've got half the people saying, no, don't do it, and half the people saying, yes, definitely do it, then I think that would probably suggest it's pretty fair value. And then Jacob Kramer 414 said, basically was talking about the second tax apron and the fact the Warriors can't aggregate salary. So a lot of those trades are proposed on last episode, not actually eligible for teams above the second tax apron to make, which I think I did actually state at the time as well, that this couldn't be made if the Warriors were above. These couldn't be made if they were above the second tax apron. I think just on that quickly, I think that's why the Warriors will probably look to push CP3's guarantee date, which is currently June 28th, back into July after the start of free agency, because obviously we want to see what happens with Klay, and whether the Warriors can get under the second apron is going to be totally dependent on what happens with CP3 and Klay. Obviously, guaranteeing Loon as well is going to push them up more in terms of payroll. So that's why I think ideally for the Warriors, you go to Chris Paul and say, look, there's still a chance you can get your $30 million for next season, but if you're any chance of that, we're going to have to push it back. Otherwise, if you make us decide right now by June 28th, we will cut you, and you're not going to see any of that $30 million. You're going to probably have to go and get the taxpayer mid-level $5-6 million elsewhere. So if you're Chris Paul, if for the sake of a week, 10 days or whatever it is, I think if you're a chance of getting your $30 million, you should probably agree to that. And so I think ideally that's what the Warriors would do. See what happens with Klay and see what options they have available to them after that in terms of getting under the second apron. It is going to be important, though, to do that because of all the penalties, which, as Jacob pointed out, includes not being able to aggregate salaries in a trade. So we'll wait and see there. Other than that, guys, another longish episode, but plenty to talk about. I'm sure by the time this episode comes out, there might be a new update on Klay and the latest on that, which hopefully swings in the other direction and sheds a bit more optimistic light on him returning to the Warriors. We'll wait and see. Other than that, once again, I hope you've had a great weekend. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that would be greatly appreciated. You can follow me at POK252, that's POK252 on Twitter /X, and I'll see you on the next episode.